Welcome to Shoulda Books, the podcast about all the books you should have read by now. My name is Jonathan, and today I am talking with novelist, screenwriter, producer, and publisher Luke Goebel. Luke's debut novel, 14 Stories, None of Them Are Yours, came out in 2014 and became a cult hit. He is the co-writer of feature films Causeway, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Brian Tyree Henry, and Eileen, starring Anne Hathaway and Thomasin McKenzie. Luke's second novel, Kill Dick, came out earlier this year via Red Hen Press, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. I really did.
Thank you.
And it's a dark, satirical thriller about an art school dropout who gets involved in a deadly web of opioids, cults, rehab, and murder in 2016 Los Angeles. Luke Goebel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's, I think, for my money, one of the most spiritually and psychically accurate depictions of Los Angeles that I've read.
Wow.
And I'm curious. I mean, obviously you wrote a whole book kind of summing up the city, but if you had to sum up the city in a couple sentences, how would you do that?
I guess it's many towns, many neighborhoods, many realities that organize around, I guess, the selling of points of view. And in that sense, it's essentially a mirror. You know, it's a mirror by the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I mean, you can't really talk about LA. That's why you write a book about it, or
Right.
make a movie about it, or you know what I mean? Like there's like misconceptions about Los Angeles, that it's vapid or that it's corrupt. You know, the old like the devil's in rock and roll, the devil's in Hollywood, that whole bullshit.
That part's true.
Yeah.
I mean.
But like, or that it's like, you know, that it's the industry, or that it's the West Side, or that it's all, you know, rich, or that it's all plastic surgery, that it's all Erewhon. Like, I mean, Erewhon is kind of taking over in a really disgusting way, but I hate going into that goddamn store.
There's something incredibly soul crushing about going in there. For people who don't know, and if you don't know, God bless you.
Yes. God bless you.
You know how grocery stores cost a lot of money these days? Well, imagine if it costed 5 times more than that.
Right. Like $30 strawberries.
Yeah, aspirational strawberries. Like I didn't know that food could be so aspirational, but yeah, it's people go there to see and be seen and spend, you know, $40 on kombucha. And
yeah, although like the whole point of LA is to not be seen.
You think so?
Yeah, absolutely.
To not be seen.
Right. It's like you don't look at people.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, you walk down the street and you can see, you know, a Rolls Royce driving past and, you know, an encampment of unhoused people.
A subtle Rolls Royce.
A subtle Rolls Royce. Yeah. Stealth wealth. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you know, like Bieber's riding his bicycle with his little, you know, hat on. You know, it's like, don't look at me. Like, just don't look at me on Sunset. Like, I'm riding my bike. Like, everybody's like, please just don't look. You know, like, don't bother me. Don't talk to me. Like, even, you know, if you're famous, like, keep your head down. Try not to be seen. If you're not famous, you know, especially you don't want to be seen because you failed. Pretty
soon into my tenure in Los Angeles, I had this kind of recurring thought that was that, you know, everyone in Los Angeles is either miserable because they are famous or because they're not famous. And, you know, at the time, I think I couldn't see past like the film industry because that's what I was, you know, trying to be part of. And I think that your book does a great job of showing that LA is so much more than just that industry, you know, like it's, but it is a place where, you know, you can only kind of see it in your peripheral vision. Like when you look directly at it, it's like it disappears.
I mean, yeah, I think it's like the kind of thing that you have to write something, you know, like grand to try to tackle as a subject. You know, like, I mean, Matthew Spector is a friend of mine. The Golden Hour, you know, as a memoir, attempts to take on kind of the city and the, you know, the industry, you know, how like, and how he worked for Danny DeVito and Robert De Niro, and they had a company together in New York, but how he started out in LA. And, you know, his father, Fred Spector, is, you know, 90, I think 2, I'm going to get it wrong, and still works at CAA. They've still got the plaque in the elevator. Like, what would Fred do? And, you know, like his kind of tracing of Lou Wasserman working for Jules Stein and the creation of RCA and Universal and the Octopus, and that leading to Reagan and that whole kind of like, and the FBI, chasing them, and the antitrust kind of laws and the ways in which that, changed the town. And then his own, growing up from a father who had, I think he was at WME and left and went to CAA and helped start CAA and that kind of whole thing. And then Geffen and the 80s and the kind of cutting of the middle of the industry of film, so that there was no longer this kind of spectrum of money spent on features. And it was more like there's the highs and the lows, and the middle got cut out. And that's happening again. And that, and like kind of growing up with the Sheens and that whole like world, that's a ambitious and large sweeping portrait of LA that's fitting for the town. I mean, I think the Shards recently we're going to talk about is another kind of grand sweeping portrait of LA, although it tends to hug closer to the West Side, just because it's an auto fiction, of Brett talking about Brett as a character writing what I guess would be Less Than Zero and growing up in LA in the 80s. Diddy and Babbitt's, like, these are people who took it on, Paul Beatty, but like, I don't know. I mean, like Truman Capote said, like, New York City is the only real city. Like, I can understand that, I mean, I think it's important that like LA is not vapid. LA is complicated. There's like even the vapid people, even like the super stereotypical West Side is like so truly weird. And the power of media is something that's in Kill Dick, that's all throughout Kill Dick. And I think media's like, ability to rapidly change a society is interesting. And LA has the ability to rapidly change a society. LA has that, like, it was made overnight, it burns, it riots. Yep. It's, like you can just go off the beaten path and there's all this land and unused stuff. And it's like, it is very like, fly by night and temporary and unstable in a way that I think like reflects the nation.
I think all of those vast kind of tendrils and facets find their way into the book in a very compact and intensely readable. Like I read it really quick. So you have brought 3 books that you think everyone should read. You already mentioned one of them. And so before we get to that, I want to say that I have gotten you a book. It might get delivered today. It might even get delivered as we're recording this, which would be incredible. But it didn't quite get there before we started. So, but there's a book in the mail for you right now. That,
really?
Yes. That I think.
Thank you. Thank you for sending me a book.
Of course, yeah. So I'll at the end of this episode, I'll reveal what the book is.
Oh, good.
And we'll see if it's one, A, that you've read before. It's a good chance you have, and B, if it's something you think might be interesting. So, but without any further ado, the first book, you want to talk about the one you've already mentioned?
The Shards was instrumental to what ended up happening with Kill Dick, because Kill Dick was all third person. It was an ensemble of points of view, close third points of view, with the main characters who are, do you want me to go through the main characters?
Only if you want to.
Okay, no. So, yeah. So when I read The Shards, I'd already sold Kill Dick, and I know Brett a little. And when I saw him at Chateau Marmont for like a cheeseburger one night randomly, with this stupid thing that happened, I was like, I totally ripped you off. I like totally ripped off The Shards. Like structurally, I just like stole. And he was like, good, you should steal from me. I was like, cool.
Do you think he meant it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't think it's even possible, if you've read Less Than Zero, to not take Less Than Zero into account as you write an LA novel. I just think it's like such an incredible book, especially from someone who is 21. But just, I just think it's like such a fantastic portrait of like young corruption.
I haven't read it.
Okay.
I haven't read any of his work, actually.
Really? Wow.
I've never.
Is that like a conscious decision? Or are you like, I don't want to read it?
Well, it's yes and no. Like, I haven't read American Psycho. Like, I saw the movie and I was like, I think I'm good. I don't think.
Did you like the movie?
I did like the movie. I liked the movie, but I chose not to read the book because I'm like, books tend to get under my skin more, and it's just also it takes me longer to consume them. I'm usually a pretty slow reader, and it was just like, I don't want to spend my time in that guy's headspace. You know, like, it was like, I feel like the movie,
that guy being Brett or that guy being Patrick Bateman?
That guy being Patrick Bateman.
Shards is great. I really love it. And what I stole from it was the idea of, I mean, when you read the book, it's like we're in the 80s, we're in, you know, prep school, private school in LA. The main character's name is Brett. He's writing his first book, which, like I say, I think must be less than 0, but maybe I'm wrong. And, you know, because it is fiction, it's autofiction. And then there's this killer called the Trawler. And there's this new student at school that he becomes sort of transfixed by or infatuated with, and also very suspicious of. And we don't know if that is the killer. This, you know, the Trawler is this boy, or, you know, and like in some ways maybe foil, or whether it's something outside, you know, of this immediate like school setting. And it's just such a masterpiece of like queer desire. For the first time, I think that Brett's written a book that's like, you know, engaging with homosexual desire in that way openly. And it's just like such a great portrait of LA. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I could have my main character, Susie Vogelman. She always started the book orbits around her. It's all about her. Even though we're in all these other characters' points of view, or 5 other characters' points of view, it's really her story. And when I read that, I was like, well, this is a story of a young woman who, you know, some of it takes place in high school, most of it is after, but like she's, you know, in the west, on the west side of LA, and she's dealing with, there's this killer. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I have her talk to us? And it's not autofiction. It's obviously.
Right. Yeah.
There's something I need to tell you. But it's a novel. Like, she has written the novel that we're reading. So it's novelization of the experiences that happened leading up to, and especially on Election Day 2016, when a series of horrific events occur in Los Angeles that she is involved around or with or directly responsible for, depending on how you read it. And this is 2 years after the fact. She's now writing the novelization from a place of having arrived as an artist, gotten sober. You know, we begin the book. She's drugged out on Oxy in her parents' backyard in Brentwood Circle, a gated community in Brentwood, and she's high on Oxy. Her dad is a primary attorney to the guy who makes the Oxy. Her best friend in high school is the daughter of the guy who makes the Oxy, Dick Sickler, who's much like Dick Sackler, who makes or, you know, made Oxy until this settlement last month. So, that's when I realized, like, well, why wouldn't she talk to us?
For the Shards, does it switch between first person and third person? Like okay, it's all first person?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So they're not that, I mean, it's not that, I guess it's not that similar, but okay, I'll show my last card. There was no serial killer at the time that I read the Shards. I don't think there were, but that can't be true. I don't remember.
Well, I know from reading some interviews you've given that you know, this book, you wrote it over a very long period of time and rewrote it a couple different times, and it changed drastically. I know in one interview you were talking about it was following a guy who was working at wow,
you've done your research.
I try. You talked about there was like these like basically Potemkin villages that the United States Army has like outside of LA that are designed to look like you know, countries that we might invade. And I was like, oh man, I mean, that did obviously, you know, didn't make it into the final book, but I'm like, I'm still interested in that story.
Yeah, I mean, I have that whole book. That was like back when I was still like so dumb that I was writing on typewriters.
Oh my gosh.
So I have all the typewriter pages.
The typewriter, I had a typewriter phase too, and I realized I came to the conclusion that like some technology, it's okay for it to be obsolesced.
Yeah.
You know, there is something charming and whimsical about clickety clacking, but it's so inconvenient, and especially when it comes to any sort of editing and also just like saving it. Like you spill coffee on this thing, you're fucked.
Also, it's just like pretending that you live in a world that's so charming and you don't anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, deadly allergic to whimsy, and I guess twee is this new fucking, this is back.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me want to just die,
Man, I'm really glad I shaved my mustache before this. So I take it the Shards is not, there's no twee in the Shards.
No, the Shards is hot, and it's like, and like, how Bateman talks about like Huey Lewis in the News and all that kind of like that flotsam jetsam like examination of culture of like pop items. Like the Shards has that. It has all that like exploration and celebration of like cultural artifact of like this song and this movement and that song, just like fashion, which this book, that's another thing I guess I stole from Brett, is just that like Susie is so aware of, and all the characters are so aware of fashion and like cultural signifiers of like what bikini is this, what pair of sunglasses is this, like what artist is this, what music is this, what is this person wearing, down to the socks, the shoes,
We in the interest of time, we have to move on, but any last thoughts on the Shards before we move on to the next book?
I love the Shards. I just loved it. Like I was like doing the thing where like I'm listening to it, on the headphones, I'm reading it. Like I'm at home, I'm reading it. Then I go out and I'm listening to it. Sometimes I like didn't have my headphones and I'd be like just playing it. And I'd be like at Rite Aid. Remember Rite Aid?
That's why they went out of business. Okay, so what's the second book?
The second book I'm going to talk about, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison.
Okay.
And I don't really know why, other than like I love the book. It was one of those books that I read like when I was like a college-aholic, like alcoholic in college. And I don't drink. I was like really an alcoholic. I think I was at my second college I was about to get thrown out of, Kenyon. And and it's essentially like obviously it's an underground narrative. Like it's a guy who has left. He's an unnamed protagonist narrator. He has left the world. He lives, I think, under the subway with like thousands of stolen light bulbs that he's running off of, Con Edison or whatever. Forgive me if I get some of this wrong. It's been for, a million years. Like Tom Cruise in Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
It's just like so much about just sort of like rejecting the world, going underground, being like, that they fucking suck. Like they fucked me. And like, there's no way to win playing their game. And like, obviously it's about race, it's about blackness. It's about like, it starts out with like, he gives a speech to like these white patrons in the South. And then they're like, all right, now fight. And they like throw him into like a smoker, and he has to like do all this like, bare knuckle boxing, and he gets the shit kicked out of him. And then, the next thing that happens is that, it's like every time he engages, he gets like burned. And then he ends up like living underground. He works in a paint factory for a while, which I think has to do with it. I think they were maybe making the whitest paint. I can't remember. But it's like, it sort of has like a similar vibe of Vineland, and like, which became One Battle After Another, of just this sort of like, for me, this sort of like resistance, this sort of like protest novel that's like, like you can't work with them. You have to work against them. And there's this great story in it about like this guy who tells people the story of this horrible thing that happened with him and his daughter when he was drunk. And like they pay him for it. And it's this way of being like people like reinforcing these stereotypes about blackness. Like, it's just such a powerful novel in so many ways that like basically is just like, you know, they're gonna fuck you over every time. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's similar being like a fucking, you know, I'm not in any way saying like, you know, I'm claiming that experience. I'm not claiming that experience, but it is the same system that creates those, you know, impossibilities and that continue to create those kind of impossibilities for so much of our society. You know, and so like when there's the section in my book that takes place on Skid Row, and that's what we're going to talk about in the third book, but like being given a, you know, like a walking education through Skid Row by a woman who was born there, lived there her whole life and died shortly after. You know, she's like showing me like how the SROs like are where you get put when you get out of jail, and like there's no fucking way you're going to make it. And just the systemic kind of racism, the systemic like poverty, the whole system of this country, and you know how it operates for the haves and the have-nots wasn't like, you know, a central project here was fighting against the opioid empire and the opioid epidemic, and looking at how the, you know, in the book, the Sickler family, in real life, the, you know, Purdue Pharmaceutical and the Sackler family manipulate culture, deceive, use the art world to play and, you know, wash and clean their own name, and how they, you know, deceive through drugs, lies, and media, art being a form of media, right? These deceptive practices to fuck us all over in the same way that, you know, like we see with Donald Trump and Epstein and Elon and all these fucking assholes. And so it's just looking at kind of like, you know, how do you take up residence underground in some way to create a radical resistance, whatever experience you're coming from, right? And then that becomes really complicated because the people who do tend to have agency, like Luigi Mangione, come from a lot of money and are told that they have agency. And the people who don't feel like they have any agency, it's a lot harder to, you know, figure out like, you know, how a resistance movement, but it's been done. And so that idea of like having a book that's like, all right, we're going to remove ourselves from the dysfunctional society and figure out a way to fight back is essential to Kill Dick. And, you know, I found inspiration reading Invisible Man. I found inspiration reading, you know, Pynchon, Vineland, you know, which was very much obsessed, like the movie adaptation is obsessed with, you know, everything from Black Panther movement to the Sudanese Liberation Army to, you know, in my time period, it was the Animal Liberation Front and Earth First. And, you know, but like these kind of like, you know, I guess the Weather Underground was in there somewhere.
Right.
These kind of, you know, like networks of resistance. And just like, you know, what does that look like today?
Did you feel like when you read Invisible Man for the first time, do you feel like it opened your eyes to new ways of seeing the world? Or do you feel like it was more of a confirmation of ways you were already seeing it? Okay.
No, I mean, it definitely opened my eyes. It was a very powerful narrative, and I hadn't read anything that had that much like force of will and like resistance and anger and righteous indignation and beauty, where it was like, this is like a sacred text of extremely well crafted and like dedicated to the beauty of the human spirit, while also being like, and fuck this shit.
Right.
You know? And like, for me, that was important, you know, to experience something that had that kind of energy. And I mean, I had a fairly like decent education growing up in Portland, Oregon. Like, you know, we read, you know, Howard Zinn instead of the history textbook. And we read, you know, diverse authors, and like, it wasn't but there was something about Invisible Man that was just like, it was just something completely different, you know?
Yeah.
It was something that was like pulsating with a resistance that then led me to read, you know, you know, Eldridge and like all these other different, you know, authors that were taking part in that conversation.
In the face of the you know, fucked up system we all live in, like, what do you think? How do you think authors should be attacking that? Should authors be attacking that? And if so, how?
I mean, I don't think anybody should do anything. I mean, not really. Like, I don't think it's my place to say what people should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's maybe foolish and maybe noble to attempt to say something that, or make people feel some level of catharsis or some sense of like they're not alone in these feelings, and that like that, that like most of what you buy isn't going to tell you that the system is fucked. You know what I mean? Or that like,
right.
or that like, you're part of something that's desperately in need of your action.
Mm-hmm.
Or that at least like, is eating away at your soul, and you're having to like deal with, how is it possible that this is what it's feeding me? How is it possible that reality has gotten to this? At least, this reality, like how is it that like what we talk about is like, most likely a child rapist in office, and, almost certainly. And, the fucking White House as a trailer park, and fucking Elon Musk with $1 trillion, and, genocide and insane war that makes no fucking sense. And, and the building of like infinite, construction of data centers that are going to poison the water and drive local residents insane with the sound of its like, tinnitus inducing like, noise. And so like, most of what's for sale isn't going to make you think about that, because it's being sold by that. Mm-hmm. So like, is there something noble about that? Maybe. Is there something healing and cathartic about that? Maybe. Is there a way that it resets us and makes us go like, yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. And there are real people, and there is like real world, and flowers exist. And maybe there's something that we can do for, each other. Maybe. It might also be like the stupidest thing that you can do. Like maybe you should write a book that works. Like, I don't know how, but I think maybe the next book I'll actually like try to like write something about like, I don't know, like pets. I don't know, like what would my mom want to read? Like, or maybe, just something that's like so simple. Like, like.
What would the Luke Goebel Hallmark movie look like?
That's a good question. Probably like somebody who like has a few problems and then just decides to do good things. And like, then like goes up and like starts like going around cleaning up dog shit or something, like as a volunteer. And then like something great happens to them. And then like something like slightly bad happens. And then they become like, I don't know, married to an influencer.
Well, you can't show dog shit on Hallmark, unfortunately. But
really? That's not that?
Yeah, that's
I mean, this is the problem, is I just don't know. Like, do you have any good ideas for like really like easy books that people could just like flip through? Because that is like the big criticism, right? Like people either love Kill Dick, or they're like, it's dense.
Right.
Like, I can't read this after 2 glasses of wine. Or like, I just like, it didn't like groove with my brain.
Well, I think like it's the sort of book where it kind of hurts to read. Like it's so like it, but I think in a good way.
What kind of hurt? Like brain hurt or like heart hurt?
Like heart hurt, because I think it's like it's laying bare so many things that control our lives, but we don't really talk about and we don't really think about, And so I think that like there were times where I had to kind of like put it down and just be like, okay, I need a minute.
But when you put it down, would you be like then disappointed by this world? Like, you're like, oh, but I kind of want to go back into that trip. Or were you like, no, I'm good?
A little bit. No, a little like it, and a trip is a good way to put it. Like I didn't want to, I couldn't stay away from it. And so,
that's what I was hoping. That's when I felt like it was finally starting to work. It would be like, when you're doing a book, you like have to read it 1,000 times,
Yeah.
Even when it's like, finished, you have to do like finished, sold, whatever. You still have to do like all these revisions and all these times through it. At least I do. And that was the thing that made me feel like, okay, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is good. Because like when I'd put it down, I'd be like, I kind of want to go back in. Like it was like the trip was more appealing than the straight world to me. But maybe that was just me. I don't know. But when it's not working, because you're like, I don't even want to be in there.
Right.
I'm out. Get me the fuck out. and that's when you just like are done. Like you just like done. I don't know when that book died.
Well, I think this brings us to the third and final book. You mentioned it earlier. What is it?
The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner.
The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner. I'm not familiar with this book.
It was her second to last book, before Creation Lake, which was her most recent. The Mars Room is about a woman named Romy who is in prison in Southern California for murdering her stalker. And so it's like an examination of the like kind of California, prison system. It has a lot of theory in it. She seduces her prison teacher. What do you call that? Professor? I don't know. And he's like obsessed with the Unabomber.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of like theory, as there always is with hers, and like philosophy and art and, social, like, political movements and subversive underground movements. But I think the throughway there is, like I said, this woman took me out on Skid Row, and that woman, Teresa, who we ended up helping bury because she died of an overdose, was really amazing. And she was, she helped Rachel with research for the March. So some of the anecdotes and stories and insights into what goes on in prison, she worked in prison reform, were directly from Teresa, who I spent just like one day with. And she took me out in the rain on Skid Row with like a paper bag of candy bars that I had to like, that was like getting rained. So, like disintegrate. And I'd have to be like, hey, do you want a candy bar? Like thank you for letting me like, go down the street and like learn. And then she was telling me all these stories and all these observations that she was sharing and that I was seeing, like became that chapter on Skid Row. But I just also really like the Mars Room because, again, it's got like, that like chewing broken glass, like, fuck you kind of like, like there's something wrong here. The way that these people are being treated with this system, with this, with the justice system, with, how women are treated, with how, people get, a lack of justice for when they're, victims of predator men, just like the stories that all of these women and inmates share in the book with one another and how they relate to these themes with like, the Unabomber and with these, like kind of like, like questions of what our society does and how it fucking traumatizes people and like what's real and what's not real. And just like the kind of collective, like just fucking suffering of these, people who, are all victims of, trauma. Like, like nobody's in prison because somebody did them right.
Right. There's very few like true mustache twirling people who are just like, I just like doing evil.
No, they're running.
They don't go to prison. Yeah, those guys. Yeah.
Right.
What were some things that you, I don't know, just learned about humanity in general from your time on doing research on Skid Row? Just
like, I mean, and first of all, like, I always say like I've been to 5 jail cells and 4 rehabs and 2 mental institutions. Like, it's not like I had never, I never lived anywhere like Skid Row, but I've lived in vehicles and I've lived, hand to mouth, and I've been, like I was a drug addict and, an alcoholic and all this shit. So it's not like I was a total, I was a tourist, but it's not like I hadn't, like done my own research into some, but what I didn't know about Skid Row, what you would never know driving by or even walking through, is that it's like a highly organized environment, that like every street is run by someone. And you have to, like it says in the book, like you have to, get their permission and you have to do things in exchange for your residence. So it's like, you think like, oh, well, if you end up down and out, like at that level and you're like, living in a tent, like at least you might have some agency, but you don't. Like you're still getting trafficked or having to traffic or having to, and just the fact that like we can't do better for people who've, the fact that prisons are as horrible as they are, for everyone who isn't a white collar protected class, like the fact that it's so fucking awful is just abhorrent, like that we can't do better than that. And then when people get out, that they would have to live right on fucking Skid Row while taking piss tests and like trying to, stay out of trouble. And like, it's like, that's insane. Like, why can't we find somewhere that people can, and like, I did an event last night with a woman in Portland, and like, she's doing that work right now, like creating beds and places for people who get out of prison and for people who are homeless to like, get a chance, and who are addicted to get a chance to, stay sober and to like, find, sanctuary. And I work on this board of directors, the Portland Alano Club. And like, we're the oldest, largest, non-government, non-clinical like provider of resources for people in need. We're the largest non-government, non-state distributor of Narcan. And like, we have programs, but there's still like, there's just so many people who are so traumatized and have such a hard time, and there's just nowhere that they can go to like try to rebuild a life, and the fact that we can't do better than that is abhorrent. And the fact that like the liberal approach to that, the conservative approach to that is, the worst.
Right.
But the other side is sort of just like ignore,
right.
just like ignore people until they die, and just like hands off. It's like there's got to be something that we can do, but it's really hard, because when you try to build places for people, there's NIMBY. There's like people like, I don't want that here.
Right.
I don't want here. I don't want that
right.
here. I don't want that in my neighborhood. I don't want that in my neighborhood. And so it's like, they just are stuck on Skid Row. But yeah, I guess that's what I learned, was just like, wow, this is a really highly controlled environment with a lot of highly controlled governmental involvement. Like the police are running hustles. The SROs are, state, city run. Like, this is a planned experience.
SRO, that's single resident occupancy. Is that what? Okay. Yeah. And that's where people go, like they're let out of prison, and then that's where they stay. But that's just going to be kind of a trap.
Right. So I basically just like, everywhere I go, I'm just like, here's my number, and like, if anybody calls me, then I'll try to help them figure out where they can go, but it's incredibly difficult. Like when I find people like in Portland, when I'm out walking and I run into somebody who's like, strung out, all fucked up on fentanyl. And I'm like, do you want any help? A lot of times they're like, yeah, I do. And, can you help me call my mom? Can you help me call my dad? And like, I'll do that. And we'll talk to their parents. And then they'll be like, I'm ready. Like, I want to go get better. And I'll like walk them to the places on Burnside and the Mission. And they'll be like, Thursday morning from 9 to 10, you can come here and we have someone that you can have a consultation with, and we can try to get you a bed somewhere for treatment. It's like, there's no fucking way they're going to make it till Thursday between 9 and 10 a.m. to do a consult, And then I, give them my number, and I'm like, well, like, let me find, call me if you're still interested. And like, we'll try to find you a bed somewhere. And like, I never get a call. Like, there's these moments, like there's these like moments of opportunity where something could change, but there's nowhere to go. You can go over to DePaul now, it's called something else. And they're like, we're full. And you can go to the, to the soup kitchens and the, whatever. And they're just like, come for an hour on 9 to 10. It's like, that's never going to work. So I don't know. That's something that like, I'm newly on this board with some really good people, some really great authors actually. And like, we're going to try to figure out, what we can offer. But the best I got right now is just like giving out my number and being like, reach out to me. But no one ever does.
Well, I'm going to put your number on screen right here. If people do want to contribute or get involved in those organizations, I can put links to those in the description.
One's called Bridgeway in Salem.
Bridgeway, okay.
And then the one that I'm involved with is the Portland Alano Club.
Okay.
And Pearl Jam gave us like 60 grand to hand out Narcan. Like, so that's fucking cool. And, like we almost we like had a huge financial crisis and we made it through, and we're like, doing what we can. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's like, maybe it's just about like everybody getting involved, because the guardrails are gone. There is no government to help you. Like, there is nothing to be done with the social media fucking machine other than burn coal and feed Zuckerberg's yacht. So like, we better get out there and do something.
Yeah, like I said, I'll put those links in the description. As we wrap up here, well, first of all, any final thoughts on this book, on the Mars Room?
I just think it's like it's my favorite Rachel book, and she's a friend, and I really like it. I hope it gets adapted. I know this has been in the works for a long time. I think it would make a great film, and I just I admire it. Like, it's one of those books that like the whole time through I'm just going like, this is really good. Like, this is really good. And you get to the end, and you're like, man, that was great. And also that's the same kind of like, there's an underground subversive territory to it of the mind and the heart, where it's like, yeah, okay, like, right. There's still an active resistance movement in this country. There's still really smart people making art and reminding us that, like, something's rotten in Denmark, and
right.
Like, you are Hamlet, and you better fucking figure it out. Like, what are you going to do about it?
All these books, I haven't read any of them, but I would like to. And but I've gotten you a book. Like I said, I don't know if it has arrived. I was hoping for that ring on the doorbell, but the book that I got you is Look at Me by Jennifer Egan.
Cool.
It's
nice.
I don't know. Have you read it before?
I have not read it. I've read her, but I haven't read it.
Okay, yeah, it's one of her early books, and it's about this fashion model in New York who gets in a really horrific car crash, and her face gets completely reconstructed to the point where she looks like a completely different person. So like, this happens when she's outside of the city. She comes back to the city, and it's like she kind of gets this chance to be a new person. And it's really an examination and a meditation on image and identity, and it also has some really incredible like foresight. Like, this book came out in 2001, and she not only predicts a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center a couple months before it actually happened.
The World Trade Center. She like says, this is where it's, wow.
I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I've read it, but it's New York at least, but I'm pretty sure. What's that?
Was it just what happened? Was it planes?
It wasn't planes, but
no one saw
but
that.
she predicted that. She also kind of predicts like influencers, like the whole kind of influencer economy. So it's a really interesting artifact in that sense, but it's also just like a really engaging story as well. So
I can't wait to read it. I like her, and her writing is incredible. And
I'm a huge fan of hers. Yeah,
I can't wait to read it. Did you think of this because of all the like doubling and like people wearing disguises and like becoming each other in Kill Dick?
Yeah, I definitely like that element of it, and then also just like, you talk about mirrors and surfaces in this book, and she also there's a passage in this book that kind of runs on similar paths as well. And basically, like, there's this character who is a kind of a failed professor who like realizes like he has this, like, I think it was, again, it's been a while since I've read it, but I think his like PhD was about the invention of the mirror and like glass and how the invention of glass like completely changed like the course of humanity. So anyway, so I think you'll find some of the subject matter.
I can't wait to read it.
Interesting. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Anything you want to plug? I mean, obviously, Kill Dick, it's available now via Red Hen Press. Anything else you want to shout out?
Just shameless plug for Tyrant Books being back. So if you've got a book, if you've got something that you want to share with us, we're doing like 50% profit sharing with our authors now. Like,
oh wow!
So you want to send us something good. You want to make a bunch of money. You want to leave your big five nasty home with your fancy press and come slum it with us. No, I mean.
Yeah,
we've done
it'll be an adventure.
We've done a pretty good job with our books. I mean, like Preparation for Next Life sold over 50,000 copies with us as our first novel out. Like, yeah, no, like we're just like, we're reading. So send to me, put somebody else email or something. And no, you put my email and send me your book.
Well, I've already put your number out, so
good.
Yeah. So you'll be expect some texts.
And also, if you're strung out and you want to talk, I mean, hopefully it's both.
Hopefully it's Ideally,
we do
it's
that
both.
Also. That's part of us. So like, if you're strung out and you've got a book, that's us.
All right. Well, Luke,
thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you for being here. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you for watching and listening. And as always, keep reading.